All right, let me set the scene for you. Imagine this. You're in a hospital, not for anything life-threatening, thankfully, but your kiddo is sick. Like, needs to be admitted, monitored, tubes and wires everywhere, but the prognosis is good. Just needs time to recover. It's a stressful time, obviously, but you're trying to keep spirits up, you know? Make the room feel a little less sterile, a little more hopeful. So you bring in some stuff? Books, maybe a favorite blanket, and yes, balloons. Get well balloons. Bright, colorful, cheerful balloons floating near the ceiling. Little bits of joy in a room that's otherwise pretty bleak. My son, let's call him Alex, was maybe 7 at the time. He'd had surgery, nothing major in the grand scheme, but a big deal for a little guy, and he was recovering well, but feeling pretty miserable and cooped up. Those balloons? They were like anchors of happiness in his room. A big sparkly silver one that said, "Get well soon." Some bright red ones, blue, yellow, green. Just a little cluster of color near the door. Now, you ever have that one neighbor? That one person who just seems to exist purely to find fault with everything you do? The one who polices the world with an iron fist made of unsolicited opinions and thinly veiled aggression. Mine wasn't a neighbor this time. It was a woman who had the room directly across the hall from Alex. Let's call her. Well, you know the type. Her name wasn't literally Karen, but the energy? Oh, the energy was pure, unadulterated Karen. I'd seen her shuffling up and down the hall a few times. Older lady, permanent scowl etched on her face, hair kind of aggressively permed, like she'd lost a fight with a poodle and the poodle won. She always looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon that was also a tax bill. The first sign of trouble was just a look. She shuffled past Alex's room, saw the balloons, and her scowl deepened. Balloons are standard hospital fare for kids. Maybe she hates fun. Whatever. Ignored it. Then it escalated. Of course it escalated. This is a Karen we're talking about. They're legally obligated to escalate. The next day, I popped out to grab a coffee from the hospital cafe. Just a quick 5-minute trip. When I came back, the balloons were gone. Just gone. The little ribbons were still tied to the door handle, limp and empty. My heart sank for a second, thinking maybe they'd deflated or something, but no, they were cut. The ribbons were cleanly cut just above where they'd been tied. And then I saw her, Karen, standing outside her room, which was directly opposite Alex's, peering down the hallway like she was guarding the entrance to a dungeon. She had a small pair of scissors in her hand. I walked straight up to her, kept my voice calm, even though my blood was starting to boil. "Excuse me," I said. Did you take my son's balloons?" She didn't even look me in the eye at first, just clutched the scissors and sniffed, looking down the hall. "They were a nuisance," she finally said, her voice a low, gravelly murmur that somehow still managed to convey maximum disdain. "A nuisance," I repeated, trying to process this. "They were tied to his door. They weren't in your way." She finally deigned to look at me, and her eyes narrowed. "They were too bright," she stated, as if this was a perfectly reasonable justification for vandalism. "Too garish. This is a hospital. People are trying to rest." Those things were practically screaming. Practically screaming. Right? A cluster of helium balloons tied to a door. "They are get-well balloons for my son," I said, my voice losing some of its forced calm. "He's 7. He's recovering from surgery. They are meant to be cheerful." "Well, they aren't cheerful for me," she snapped, suddenly raising her voice. "They are an eyesore. Disruptive. All that color. It's distracting." I just stared at her. Distracting? In a busy hospital hallway? More distracting than, say, a woman standing there holding scissors she just used to cut a sick child's balloons off their door. "You had no right to touch them," I said firmly. "They were not yours. That was theft and destruction of personal property." She scoffed, a sound like a dying hyena. "Property? They were balloons. And they were public nuisance, number one. I have sensitive eyes. I'm a patient here. I require peace and quiet, not a circus parade outside my door." "You are a visitor," I corrected her, remembering I'd seen her walking in and out with someone else. "Or you're here visiting someone. My son is the patient in that room. Those were for him." She went rigid. "That doesn't matter. I am here." And they were offensive to my sensibilities. Her voice was getting louder now, echoing slightly in the quiet hallway. A nurse came around the corner, looking concerned. "Is everything all right here?" she asked gently. "No, everything is not all right," Karen shrieked, pointing the scissors vaguely in my direction. "This woman put up vulgar, loud decorations, and when I remove them, she's accusing me of theft." The nurse looked at me, then at Karen, then at the empty ribbons on Alex's door, then back at Karen's scissors. "Madam," the nurse said to Karen, her tone shifting slightly from gentle to firm, "you absolutely cannot interfere with other patients' property, especially decorations for a child. That is not acceptable behavior." Karen's face turned a shade of puce I didn't know was possible. Not acceptable? They were disturbing the peace. "I'm going to speak to the hospital administrator. This is outrageous. You allow this visual assault in the hallway." She stomped off, well, as much as someone with her gait could stomp, towards the elevators, still clutching the scissors, muttering darkly about administrators and rights and the sheer injustice of colorful balloons. The nurse sighed and shook her head. "I'm so sorry about that," she said to me. "That woman. She causes problems. She's visiting her sister who's been here a long time. She seems to think she runs the place." I thanked the nurse, feeling a little validated but still furious. Alex was upset when I told him the balloons were gone, though he didn't fully grasp that they'd been deliberately cut down. He just knew his happy colors were gone. I bought him new balloons, even brighter ones. I tied them inside the room this time, floating near the window, visible from the hall, but not directly in front of the door. Victory, right? Wrong. Karen came back, saw the new balloons through the window. She didn't have scissors this time, but she stood outside the door, peering in, making loud, huffing noises. Then she started complaining loudly about them again, this time to anyone who passed, nurses, other visitors, janitorial staff. She claimed they were blocking the light, causing a fire hazard, and were still visually assaulting her sensitive eyes from inside the room. The nurses did their best, politely telling her to move along, explaining that inside room decorations were permitted as long as they didn't block medical equipment, which they didn't. But she was persistent. She'd stand there and glare. She'd make loud coughing noises whenever someone walked past Alex's door. She was waging a passive-aggressive war on my son's get-well balloons. This went on for another day. Every time I left the room, even for a minute, she'd be lurking nearby, looking ready to pounce. She even cornered one of the doctors, babbling about the menace of the helium horrors down the hall. The doctor, bless him, just nodded and said, "Yes, well, cheering up the patients is important," and walked away. But it was grinding me down. I was already stressed about Alex, trying to get some rest myself, and dealing with this petty, relentless harassment was exhausting. I tried talking to patient services. They said they'd speak to her, remind her about visitor conduct. It worked for about an hour. Then she was back, huffing and glaring. The final straw came that evening. Alex was finally comfortable enough to watch a movie on a tablet I brought. It needed to be plugged into charge, and the only convenient outlet was on the wall near the door. I had a long charging cable, so the tablet was on his bedside table, but the plug was near the hall. Karen shuffled by and saw the cable. She stopped, looked at the cable, then at the room, then back at the cable. "Is that your charger?" she demanded, already working herself up. "Yes," I said, stepping towards the door. "My son is using his tablet." "You can't use that outlet," she screeched. That's a hospital outlet. Those are for medical equipment. You're stealing electricity from sick people." "Okay, stealing electricity for a tablet charger is one thing. That is connected to my son's medical care. If his tablet dies, he gets distressed, and stress isn't good for his recovery. Leave it alone. It wasn't strictly medical care, but it was part of keeping him calm and comfortable, which was important for his recovery." White lie justified. She recoiled slightly, hesitating, probably picturing the hospital board descending on her for interfering with a patient's recovery. But the look in her eyes was pure venom. She backed away slowly, still muttering about stolen power and essential equipment. That was it. Balloons were one thing. Harassing a sick child's parent was another. Interfering with something keeping the kid happy and comfortable? That crossed the line. The final, flaming, balloon-shaped line. I went back into the room. Alex was engrossed in his movie. Good. He didn't need to see this. I sat there for a bit, fuming. This woman was relentless. She wouldn't stop. She was making an already tough situation infinitely worse with her petty, entitled nonsense. And then a thought sparked. A beautiful, mischievous, slightly devious thought. She cared about electricity. She cared about resources. She felt entitled to police them. Well, two could play at that game. My job, thankfully, gives me a decent understanding of basic electronics and networking. Nothing super complex, but enough to be dangerous, or at least incredibly annoying. I wasn't going to build a death ray, but maybe a minor inconvenience ray. I spent the next couple of hours doing some furious online research on my phone, looking up hospital electrical systems, general knowledge, nothing specific to this hospital for plausible deniability, power draw of common devices, and how certain types of electrical interference work. I also ordered a couple of small components for delivery to the hospital. Hospitals have gift shops, they have pharmacies, they have various points of delivery. This wasn't a shady alley deal. I just needed a couple of specific electronic bits you can order online easily. The plan started to form. Karen seemed obsessed with the outlets, with who was using what power. What if her power source became unreliable? Not just faulty, but actively unreliable in a way that was hard to diagnose and seemed to follow her. Here's what I cooked up. I needed a small, portable device. It would consist of a simple power monitoring circuit and a low-power, intermittent signal generator. The idea was to detect when a device was plugged into a nearby outlet and drawing power. If the draw was consistent with a laptop or tablet charger, easy to test with my own, the device would then emit a very specific, low-level burst of electrical noise onto the line. Think of it like this. Your phone charger is trying to have a nice, steady conversation with the wall outlet about getting power. My device would sit there, listen for that conversation, and then occasionally shout random nonsense onto the line. Not enough to blow a fuse or cause a blackout, just enough to make the charger think the power was unstable, causing it to pause or reset its charging cycle briefly. Most modern chargers are smart enough to stop charging if the power flickers or surges. My device would simulate tiny, harmless flickers or surges. This would result in whatever she was charging stopping and starting intermittently. Not enough to stop it completely, just enough to make it take forever to charge, or worse, drain faster than it charged if she was actively using it. The beauty was it was localized, low power, and wouldn't affect hospital equipment. It was designed to specifically mess with the conversations between modern, sensitive personal electronics and their power source. Plausible deniability was key. This thing was tiny, could run on a battery, and could be hidden easily. It wouldn't permanently damage anything. It would just be annoying. Infuriatingly annoying to someone who relied on their devices and was obsessed with power consumption. The components arrived the next morning. A small project box, a tiny microcontroller, a current sensor, a voltage regulator, a battery pack, and some wires. I told the nurse at the desk I was expecting a small delivery of craft supplies to keep my son entertained, which wasn't entirely a lie. Electronics were a kind of craft for me. I spent an hour or so at Alex's bedside while he napped, assembling the device. It wasn't pretty, but it worked on my test charger. It even had a little indicator light that blinked when it detected a charger and was doing its thing. I called it the Karen Kicker. Internally, of course. The hospital outlets are recessed into the wall, often with a small plastic plate around them. There was one outlet directly opposite Alex's door, just outside Karen's sister's room. It was a high-traffic area for visitors and staff, but Karen often lingered there, claiming it was quieter or had better reception or some nonsense, and would plug her laptop or tablet in there. My plan was simple. Wait for Karen to settle in her usual spot and plug in her device. Discreetly place the Karen Kicker nearby, maybe disguised in a small bag or box, close enough to the outlet to work. Let the annoyance begin. The opportunity came that afternoon. I saw Karen shuffle out of her sister's room with her ubiquitous tablet and charger. She headed straight for the outlet across the hall. She plugged in. She settled into a chair brought from the waiting area, tablet open, clearly ready for a long session of whatever is Karen's do on tablets, probably composing angry emails. I waited a few minutes, grabbed a book, told Alex I was just going to sit outside and read for a bit. The chairs in the hall were more comfortable than the rooms. Casually walked out, picked a chair a little further down the hall, but with a clear view of Karen and the outlet. The Karen kicker was in a small, nondescript pouch I often carried spare cables in. It was running on its internal battery. I placed the pouch on the floor near the outlet, as if I just set my bag down briefly. I settled into my chair and opened my book, but I was watching. Within a couple of minutes, Karen frowned. She looked at her tablet screen, then at the charging icon. She unplugged the charger, looked at it, fiddled with the cable, and plugged it back in. Charging icon came on. Good. My device was detecting it and starting its work. A minute later, she frowned again. Unplug, fiddle, plug back in. This repeated several times. Her frown deepened into a look of intense concentration, then frustration. She tried a different orientation of the plug. She tried wiggling the cable. Other visitors walked by. Nurses wheeled carts. Life in the hospital hallway went on. Karen, however, was becoming visibly agitated. She unplugged the charger again, this time looking accusingly at the outlet. She tried another one on the same plate. Plugged in. Same result. Unreliable charging. Her muttered complaint started, loud enough for me to hear from a few feet away. Useless outlets. Hospital cheapness. Probably overloaded. Stealing power. The irony was delicious. She was complaining about the hospital's outlets and stolen power, just as her own power supply was being subtly sabotaged. She tried another outlet down the hall. Plugged in. This one worked fine. Her tablet started charging normally. She looked back at the outlet near Alex's room with suspicion. She unplugged her tablet from the working outlet, marched back to the one near Alex's room, and plugged back in, as if to prove a point. Nope. Charging cut in and out. Her face was turning red again. She unplugged it with excessive force, practically yanking it from the wall. She then spent the next hour shuffling between different outlets in the hallway and nearby waiting areas, trying to find one that worked reliably. Every single one near Alex's room, or in the immediate vicinity where I could place the kicker discreetly, caused her problems. Outlets further away, where my little device's signal couldn't reach effectively. They worked perfectly. She couldn't figure it out. She tried different combinations of outlets and chargers. She even tried plugging in her phone charger, same intermittent result in the affected areas. Her frustration was a tangible thing. She kept looking around suspiciously, as if someone was playing a trick on her. She glared at other people using outlets successfully further down the hall. Finally, she stomped back to her sister's room, defeated for the moment. I retrieved the Karen kicker, slipped it back into its pouch, and went back into Alex's room. He was still watching his movie, blissfully unaware of the electronic warfare that had just taken place outside his door. This became the pattern for the next couple of days. Whenever Karen emerged and tried to use her preferred charging spots near Alex's room, the kicker went into action. I'd find an excuse to be in the hall, getting water, going to the vending machine, pacing while on the phone, and discreetly place or carry the pouch near the target outlet. Her complaints grew louder and more frequent. She cornered every nurse and orderly she could find, ranting about faulty wiring, substandard electrical systems, and incompetent maintenance. The staff, who were already familiar with her constant complaining, would patiently explain that the outlets were tested regularly, that they had no reports of issues, and that maybe her chargers were the problem. This only fueled her fire. She'd wave her brand-name chargers around, declaring them top of the line and infallible. She even tried plugging her stuff into the outlets inside her sister's room, but apparently preferred the public ones for some reason, maybe thinking they were higher power or just feeling entitled to public resources. But my little device was flexible. I could sit in the waiting area near her room or find a reason to be near her door, and the kicker, even at low power, seemed to be effective within a radius of about 10 feet, especially through a wall. The peak came on the third day of the kicker's deployment. Karen was in the hall, attempting to charge her tablet, while trying to show a relative something important on it. She was plugged into an outlet directly across from Alex's door. Her tablet kept cutting out. The relative looked confused. Karen was getting increasingly agitated, tapping the screen, wiggling the plug, glaring at the outlet. Finally, she let out a frustrated scream. "This is ridiculous. It's this hospital. They can't even provide basic working electricity. It's probably because they're wasting power on excessive, unnecessary decorations." She shot a venomous look at Alex's door, where the balloons, safe inside, were still visible through the window. A hospital security guard was walking down the hall and heard the commotion. He stopped. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem," she shrieked, turning her fury onto the guard. "These outlets are all faulty. My tablet won't charge. It's because they allow people to drain the system with frivolous things like those." She jabbed a finger towards Alex's door. Colorful clutter stealing power from people who actually need it. The guard looked at Alex's door, saw the balloons, then looked back at Karen, who was practically foaming at the mouth. "Ma'am," the guard said calmly, "the outlets are fine. We haven't had any reports of electrical issues, and decorations for patients are permitted. They don't affect the hospital's power supply." "You don't know that," she yelled. "Helium is flammable. Those colors are too bright. They are a fire hazard and an energy drain. And that woman," she pointed at me, sitting innocently nearby, pretending to read my book. "She's probably doing something to the outlets. She's some kind of power pirate." I lowered my book slowly. "Power pirate," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, you and your disruptive decorations. You're messing with the electricity," she accused, advancing towards me. I stood up, still calm. "Ma'am, the staff and security have both told you the outlets are fine. My own charger works perfectly." I pulled my phone and charger from my bag, walked over to the outlet right next to the one she'd been using, and plugged in. My phone immediately showed the charging lightning bolt, steady and constant. Karen stared, her jaw slack. "See," I said, "works perfectly." She yanked her plug from her tablet and tried the outlet I was using. Plugged in. Her tablet icon flickered on and off. What is this?" she spluttered. "It's only doing it for me. It's a conspiracy." The security guard looked from her frantic face to my calmly charging phone, then back to her flickering tablet icon. A faint look of amusement crossed his face. "Ma'am," he said, his voice firm but struggling to contain a chuckle. "With all due respect, it seems the issue might be with your device or your charger. Not the hospital's electricity, and certainly not decorations." "It is not my charger," she wailed. "It's worked for years. It's her. She's doing something." She pointed at me again, shaking her hand, utterly convinced I possessed some kind of dark energy-disrupting powers. "Ma'am, if you continue to harass other visitors and make unfounded accusations, I will have to ask you to leave," the security guard stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Karen looked around wildly. The relative she'd been trying to show something to was backing away slowly, looking embarrassed. A couple of nurses were watching from the desk, trying to look professional but clearly entertained. Other people in the hall were openly staring. She was utterly, spectacularly exposed in her own unreasonable behavior. Her complaints were baseless. Her target was a sick child's parent, and her accusations were verging on the bizarre. The outlets worked fine for everyone else. Her own device was the only one having issues in the specific areas she frequented. With a final, choked gasp of pure fury and humiliation, she snatched her tablet and charger, glared daggers at me, and retreated back into her sister's room, slamming the door behind her. The security guard chuckled softly. "Power pirate," he repeated under his breath, shaking his head as he continued his rounds. I unplugged my perfectly fine charger, gave the guard a small, grateful smile, and went back into Alex's room. We didn't see Karen in the hallway again during our stay. Apparently, she had a massive argument with her sister later that day, complaining about the unusable hospital and the lunatic power pirate across the hall, and stormed out, refusing to visit until the electrical issues and the colorful menace were dealt with. Since neither of those things were actual problems, they were, of course, never dealt with. Alex recovered well and was discharged a couple of days later. As we were leaving, walking down that same hallway, I glanced over at the sister's room. The door was open. Inside, I could see the sister sitting up in bed, talking to a nurse. No sign of Karen. And pinned to the outside of the sister's door, a single deflated silver get-well-soon balloon tied there by a nurse, a quiet little act of defiance, maybe. Or maybe the sister, having heard her visitors ranting, decided a single silver balloon was just the right amount of garish to make a point. I like to think it was the latter. I smiled. Justice, in its own small, electrically interrupted way, had been served. I dismantled the Karen kicker after we got home. It wasn't needed anymore, but the feeling of having turned her own petty obsession against her, of having used a little bit of ingenuity to create a perfectly tailored annoyance that drove her utterly spare while remaining completely undetectable as intentional sabotage, that was deeply, profoundly satisfying. She wanted to police my son's symbols of cheer because they were too colorful and a nuisance and supposedly stealing attention. I policed her access to stable power, using her own paranoia about stolen electricity against her, turning her essential electronic lifeline into a constant, frustrating nuisance. And the best part? She got herself kicked out, or at least scared away, not by my direct action, but by her own escalating, unhinged reaction to a problem I created that sounded exactly like the kind of thing she would complain about anyway. Faulty services, resource misuse. She trapped herself in her own narrative of grievance. All because of some bright, cheerful balloons. You really can't make this stuff up.